So welcome to Deciphering the Thin Client Puzzle. My name is Jim Yannick. I'm a systems engineer with VMware based in Minneapolis. Anybody from Minneapolis in the audience? All right, there we go. Okay, how you doing? I'm a field systems engineer working on our partner organization. My background is I come from a pretty strong desktop background. Worked for a company called Altiris for a number of years on the desktop side, and have picked up desktop as a subject matter expertise here at VMware. And I'll let Jeff introduce himself.
I'm Jeff Whitman. I'm also an SE based in Minneapolis for VMware. I've been at VMware for, like Jim, about 3 years, just over 3 years. And I'm also a desktop subject matter expert. I just full disclosure here on the thin client session. I did spend 8 years working for Wyse Technology, so I did a lot of thin client stuff historically. Working with virtual desktop and in the Citrix space. So I need to throw that out there before we get started here. But this presentation is very vendor agnostic. Is that fair, Jim?
Yeah.
Okay.
So a couple things. We like interaction, so feel free to ask questions during the session. Shout them out the best you can. We'll try to repeat them for the benefit of everybody else in the room. There's a couple of mics if you happen to be microphone accessible and not shy. If we get to a point where we're going down a little rat hole, or I know we're not going to make our hour here, I'll move it along, but we'll hang out for questions afterwards. We don't have an immediate session after this, so we can talk in the hall or whatever. So just by way of, first of all, disclaimer, you probably have never seen this slide at VMworld yet, so just an FYI on that one. Agenda. So we're going to talk about the different types of thin clients, because there are a number of different ones out there. We're going to talk about thin clients and protocols, the different protocols that do and don't work, and how that all works out. We're also going to talk about repurposed PCs as a thin client, so extending the life of PCs that you own already. Just general information about managing them. Talk a little bit about hardware-to-hardware solutions related to Teradici, and just some notes in the selection process.
Before we get started, can I see a show of hands in here? Who has deployed thin clients to date? So quite a few of you. Okay, that's awesome. So if we're going to break that down a little further, okay, next question. Who in here is considering thin clients? I suppose everybody, since you're here, right?
Okay.
So just by OS, just so we get a feel, can I see XP Embedded? Raise your hand.
Or Windows flavors.
Yeah. Linux thin clients? Raise your hand. The Teradici Zero client? Raise your hand. Quite a few. Wyse thin operating system? Okay, good. I appreciate it. Thank you. So pretty much the whole spectrum is represented in the room, so that's great. And like Jim said, very interactive. If you have any questions, stop us. Let's talk about it, right?
Yep. So just a few assumptions. We're talking about View 4X specifically, not previous View releases, and we are talking about View specifically. It's VMworld, right? So we're going to use some examples here. You're going to see some logos. You're going to see some thin client products. We don't get paid to sell any of them, so don't be offended. We're just using them as examples. If we're not talking about your specific, product, it's just we're using them for examples. The other thing too is we lock this deck down right around August 10th. Our compatibility guide is going to change frequently. You're probably going to see some new additions once View 4.5 GAs soon. So just FYI, that's the date that we lock this presentation down as far as information. You always want to look at the compatibility guide, and we'll talk about that. So why would you use a thin client? Just some obvious reasons here. Almost no moving parts, much longer duty life. The mean time between failures on these devices is enormous. Should be simpler to manage. That's one of the obviously tenets for why you do this, to try to bring down your OpEx. Really no user-specific information kept locally, so not as much to manage out on the edge. Lower maintenance costs than traditional PCs typically. Typically also lower attack surface, more secure, and lower overall TCO than desktops would be. So just to talk about thin client device types, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff.
Okay, so we're going to start out the way we'll structure this. We'll start out with the simplest operating systems, and we'll work forward through all the different types by operating system, right? So the Zero client, this is basically the Teradici-based device, right? As you can see, there's a lot of different vendors that have these solutions, right? And all of the vendors that offer a zero client from Teradici, the feature set is exactly the same, right? They get the functionality from that Teradici chip. Teradici actually releases new versions of firmware on a regular basis to add functionality to these devices. They don't have all of the same functionality as the full 32-bit view client. You're missing a couple things, right? You'll see here that we're limited to 2 displays, for example. No thin print, no multimedia redirection. So there are some things that you can't do, right? And we're going to talk about this a lot during this presentation, but a lot of this comes down to trade-offs, right? The simpler the device, the easier it generally is to manage, but then it's also lower in cost in general, right? But then we probably lose some functionality, right? So it's what do you guys need? So as we move through this, I think that'll be a common theme, right? The bottom piece, I'm just going to comment real briefly on VDA. We don't generally like to talk about Microsoft licensing because that's obviously whatever you negotiate with Microsoft is what you negotiate with Microsoft. But just to throw this out as a basic rule of thumb, VECD went away, and now Microsoft has what they call VDA. And if you're not running a Windows operating system, you're not eligible to use subscription advantage, right? Or what do they call it?
Software advantage, yeah.
Software assurance, right?
So, yeah, software assurance. So VDA is virtual device access, and a rough street price on that licensing is about $100 per device.
So with all thin clients, you're going to be looking at this type of a Microsoft tax to run a thin client in your environment, right? So something to keep in mind. This isn't limited to the zero client. This is across the board with all the thin clients, right? Yeah. Is that per year? I want to say it is per year. I think it is.
Anybody know for sure? Yeah, it is per year. Yeah, pretty sure it was.
Yeah. Okay, so moving up from the zero client, we're going to talk about Wyse Thin Operating System, WTOS, right? This is a pretty popular operating system out there. Again, full disclosure, I worked for Wyse. This is my personal favorite. I really love this operating system. Very simple, performs very well, very easy to manage. This operating system is great, right? But again, there are a couple limitations here, right? And the limitation that I need to point out first and foremost is that at this point we don't support PC over IP, right, on this device. So obviously, you know, if you're looking at doing a view deployment, that is a limitation, right? This device supports RDP. It supports RDP7. It doesn't support PC over IP today. Any comments on that? When? And again, that's above our pay grade, right? I know that there's discussions around that. I have a lot of customers that are View customers that use this device and like this device and want PC over IP. Can I see a show of hands? Anybody here that has WTOS that would like to see PC over IP? Yeah, I think that's a real common theme, guys. And I know that discussions are happening. And, you know, as you talk to Wyse, their official line is, there's no technical reason we can't do it. And then they kind of stop short and leave it at that. So it's something, you know, above our pay grade. And hopefully we'll see something soon. But that's not a VMware conversation. Talk to Wyse and see what they say, right? We can't really comment. Right. Yeah. Say that again. Is there overhead running RDP on this OS? No. This device performance is exceptional. It's a very small, very thin operating system that's purpose-built to provide a thin client experience, right? So it's very efficient. It really performs well. Yeah. So the question is, when you say zero client, there's no OS, and when we say thin client, there is an OS, and what distinguishes the two? So when we talked on the last slide about zero clients, we'd say that it's basically firmware that runs there. I mean, there is software that's running on that zero client. Obviously, we have to be able to configure it to talk to View. So It's a zero client, meaning there isn't a Linux distribution running on board, right? It's very thin. It's very easy to manage. It's just running firmware that knows how to talk to View, right? When we move up through the stack, to a more traditional thin client like ThinOS or Linux or Windows XP embedded, we really are talking about an operating system that is running locally on the device at that point. And then it's, well, how heavy of an operating system is it, right? So I'm just simply stating here that this is the smallest of the zero. If we start with the zero client and say there's no operating system, this has a very small operating system. Is that fair?
And we use the term thin client in the title of the presentation in the most generic sense. So we're talking about zero and thin clients.
Question. What type of MMR does it do? So what type of multimedia redirection? So with View, VMware has baked in multimedia redirection, right, as part of the client. So when you install the View agent into your machine, we're installing multimedia redirection as long as the client knows how to decode that, right? So originally we OEM'd that technology from Wyse. So this device is completely compliant with the View multimedia redirection, as are the Linux thin clients and the XP embedded thin clients. The only OS that we're talking about today that can't do that is the zero client that we referred to on the last slide. And as far as support of codecs, is that what you're referring to? Yes. So we're with this technology, with multimedia redirection, we can do MPEG-1, MPEG-2, MP3, MPEG-4, WMV, WMA. There's a lot of support here. The one thing it's not doing is flash. I'd like to say we're following Apple's lead in this space, but that's...
but just to be clear, we do flash. We do host side rendering on flash with PC over IP. So that's how we handle flash. It just doesn't go through the MMR channel. We're rendering it on the host side and pushing it through to the desktop.
Yeah, I guess I should have clarified, right? So when we talk about multimedia redirection, what we're really talking about is if you hit any of those media formats that I just ran off, it'll actually send the media itself over IP down to the local device, and it'll be rendered locally. So performance is very good. We're offloading the playing of that video file or audio file from the ESX host and actually executing locally. So in the case of playing video with multimedia redirection, if I double-click on an MPEG file or a WMV file, Media Player will open in my View session, and it'll look like it's playing in my session, but what's actually occurring is the video is being streamed down to my local device and being played with a codec on the local device and being painted in Media Player in the session. So it's a pretty cool little trick. So you get the performance of playing it locally, but the seamless integration of displaying it in the session. This device does not support... MMR is supported with PC over IP. We'll talk about the protocol later in the presentation. So with this device, we can do MMR, but again, only with RDP because this device doesn't support PC over IP. This operating system doesn't support PC over IP. Yeah? Is MMR player specific?
No.
So with this operating system, Wyse bakes those codecs into the OS itself. Again, with a zero client, there isn't a codec locally because it's a zero client, right? So that's why MMR isn't supported. And then with Linux and XP embedded, we're relying on those codecs to be under the underlying OS, and they are for all the Linux thin clients and all the XP embedded devices, the Windows embedded devices. On the virtual machine side, yeah, when we actually install the View agent, the redirection piece gets installed. It's a DLL that gets installed into that virtual desktop. And that's how it knows to redirect the content down to the local device.
So we're not player specific, but you would have to install the codec you needed for the player if you wanted to use a specific player. So the player would still have to be able to do the codec if you wanted to use a specific player. Right.
Okay, so the question on this side of the room that I'd like to ignore for the time being is what are the bandwidth requirements for RDP compared to PC over IP? So okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to wait for us. We have a slide that addresses that, and the convenient thing, if you're me, is that it's Jim's slide. So let's push that question back. Okay. Anything else on the thin OS before I go to the next OS? Question. How many simultaneous connections? So how many simultaneous virtual desktops can be displayed on this device? A very large number. I don't know what that number is, but I mean, each session is going to consume some amount of memory, but there's a lot of memory in here. So it would be a finite number, but it's going to be a large number. And again, you could talk to Wyse specifically about that.
We should probably take one more question.
USB redirection. Okay. And again, I am going to have to move forward.
So, okay, yeah.
But I'm going to answer that question.
Yep, okay.
So with USB redirection, when we install the View client, the full View client, either on a Linux with the OEM Linux version, which we'll talk about, or on a Win32 or Win64 OS, we're installing the USB redirection pieces there, right? So that's how you get USB redirection natively in View. We can't install a View client here, so what Wyse has done is they've done their own USB redirection piece, so you would run a piece of Wyse software in the virtual machine that would know how to do USB redirection to Wyse Thin OS. So there is USB redirection support. It's just using a different USB redirection technology than we're doing in View, but they're compatible. They can be run side by side in the same host, the same virtual desktop. I do think I have to keep going, though, because...
We'll spend the whole presentation on this slide.
Yeah, we do have other slides. So after this, though, by all means, we would love to continue the conversation. We'll dedicate as much time as you want. I apologize, but I'm going to move forward. Okay, we're moving up the operating system stack to Linux. Again, there's a lot of different thin client vendors. I would say every thin client vendor, almost every thin client vendor, has a Linux device. They're all very different. Some are based on mainline distributions like Ubuntu or SUSE, right? It really depends. Hey, Kevin, I didn't see you there. But it's all over the place, right? Or some are just homegrown Linux distributions. And for us, the big thing is, since we provide the thin client vendors with an OEM distribution of the View client for Linux, you get all of the functionality listed here, right? So talking about that, we have an open View client for Linux, an open source client that anybody can download. You can go out and download this right now. And we have an OEM Linux client. So that OEM Linux client is what we give to all of our partners in the thin client space so that they can offer functionality like MMR, like PC over IP, like USB redirection. If you do the open source client, you don't get any of that functionality. And the reason is because it's, in a lot of cases, other people's intellectual property, right? So we license PC over IP from Teradici. The MMR stuff we license from Wyse. We can't make that open source and distribute it in an open source client, right? So it's if you decide to roll your own Linux client and do your own PCs, you will not get this functionality. Does that make sense? Any questions here? How can you detect that MMR is working? Excuse me. There's a little tool that you can download, and it'll actually show you the connection where it does a little diagram, and when you play the video file, it'll show you if it's going through that DLL that's doing the redirection. I don't think we have that in the back of this deck.
I don't think so either.
I can get you that information afterwards. But it's really slick and it's real easy because it makes it so you can see exactly what's happening. Questions? If an OEM, with the OEM Linux client, if a codec isn't present on the underlying OS, yeah, oh yeah, any codec that, if it isn't present locally, we'll do the native, play it server side and render it on the server side, and then pipe it over that way, right? Yeah, that should just work.
Yeah, as long as the codec's there in the guest OS.
But again, for the protocols that we're talking about here, right? For the I shouldn't say protocols. For the media types that I'm referencing here, right? Like MPEG-1, MPEG-2, MPEG-4, WMV, WMA. Any of the media players that you're using are going to have all of those codecs. We're not doing anything very extravagant, right? So the question is, with voice over IP, right? I think what I'd say, and again, because we could really get down in a rat hole on the whole VoIP conversation with View in general, not specific to thin client. The limitations with doing voice over IP with thin clients is the same as it is with thick clients, and that is, I personally tell my customers, again, we're field SEs, we're out here actually trying to make this stuff work. It isn't marketing stuff, right? I just tell my customers, I won't put a soft phone in my virtual desktop. The VoIP solution, first things first, it's a lot of overhead in the ESX host to do voice over IP, and your density of VMs on that host are going to go down dramatically if you try and do that, right? And on top of that, performance doesn't scale. So I just would personally tell you that, and we're working on things to make that solution work. And maybe there's third-party stuff that works. I don't know. I've heard about solutions from other third-party companies that supposedly work. I just haven't seen anything that scales. Jim, am I fair there?
Yeah, there's no, it's a display protocol basically, so there's no quality of service built into it. I mean, with any display protocol, whether you're talking about PC over IP, RDP, HDX, whatever, it's just not quite there yet for VoIP within a View session.
Okay, good. Okay, and then Windows Embedded Standard, right? I think you were going to talk about this, Jim.
Sure. Yeah. So the last type of thin client would be, a Windows Embedded Standard, or what we've been calling XPE for a long time, as a local OS. So obviously, you're higher up the stack, more maintenance. So you still got to patch them. The write filter is not going to save you from an outbreak of a worm and those kinds of things. You still got to maintain these devices. Probably most people who have XPE thin client devices don't patch them. Not necessarily a good practice.
Can I see a show of hands? Anybody that has XP embedded that doesn't patch? Just to single you guys out.
Yeah, right. Just say, hi. I just said it's not a best practice. So yeah, exactly. But,
stand up. Everybody can look at you. We know who you are.
So basically, you're going to get all the features that we've got because you're able to run the full View client on there. So thin print, MMR, USB, the whole bit that's there, and you're still going to pay just like all the rest of the thin client devices, Microsoft VDA licensing.
Yeah, which is a kind of an odd one, right? Because you're running Windows on that device.
Right.
So we checked into that before the deck because we thought, geez, that doesn't seem right. If I'm paying for a Windows OS on my thin client, why do I still have to give Microsoft the tax on the VDA license? But from what we can see from Microsoft's licensing information, if it's not a full Windows OS, a full distribution, if it's an embedded version of Windows, VDA still applies. If you're using a thin client, they want their money. Now again, confirm that with Microsoft. If you have these types of devices, does anybody here that has Windows embedded, have you talked to Microsoft and have you gotten them to say you don't have to do this?
Yeah. You can't buy SA on embedded.
Yeah.
You can't buy SA.
Right.
That's exactly the point of their licensing. So if you guys didn't hear it, since you can't buy software assurance with an embedded OS like XP Embedded or Windows Embedded Standard or whatever you want to call it, it's not eligible for to avoid that tax. Is that fair?
Do you know Microsoft's reasoning for this?
It's more revenue. A lot of people want to deploy thin clients and they can make more money.
Again, we don't work for Microsoft.
Yeah.
So, no, I mean, you know.
I'm sure they have very altruistic motives behind that whole.
So we just called out a couple of other thin client types and a couple examples of them. So these are devices that may require some other server. So Sun and Pano would both require another server that you'd have to connect to, and then they could broker a connection back to View. They may use another protocol, like Sun has an ALP protocol. Just make sure if you're using one of these devices, you understand all the requirements, you know, how they all work. And also understand the support implications. As of the time of the writing of this, neither of these manufacturers, for example, had devices on the hardware compatibility list for View 4. So again, our recommendation as a best practice is you should be buying off the compatibility guide for View if you're doing a View implementation. And this is, I'm not going to review it now, but just a kind of just for when you download the deck later, and I'm sure you'll watch this presentation time and time again with your family, you have a reference guide, just a quick look at what does and doesn't work, again, at the time of writing here. But always, again, check the compatibility guide. Here's a screenshot. It's just, you know, it's another tab on our compatibility guide page online that, you know, allows you to just go in and take a look at what functionality is available for different thin client types. Yep.
Thin print?
Thin print is a Windows-only technology. So in order for thin print to work, with a little bit of an exception, Wyse for WTOS has a plugin to be able to manage that. So it's really a Windows technology. So on a zero client, you're probably never going to get thin print. Probably the same answer, but I'm not as sure about that one as I am on the thin print side. So just a discussion of protocols. So what protocols are supported? I'm just going to build this out. RDP, I just sort of put generically because we've been supporting RDP 6 for a long time. RDP 7 will get full support with View 4.5. So the one thing right now, for anybody who's not aware of this, we don't support PC over IP yet on our security server. We're working feverishly to do that, but if you need security server access, you're probably going to be using RDP to do that. RDP 7 will work on that just fine. You're getting better multi-monitor support than RDP 6. You don't get just that, you know, nasty stretch without putting in some third-party utility. You need Windows 7 VM to get all the features of it, and it's got some adaptability features and some nice stuff. What it doesn't have is adaptive bandwidth management like PC over IP does. So to answer your earlier question, I'm not going to make a comparison between the amount of bandwidth between RDP and PC over IP. What I will tell you is our general rule of thumb regarding PC over IP sessions for just delivering an Office desktop is about 200K per session. Your mileage is going to vary greatly depending on your use case. Things that'll make it lower, things that'll make it higher. USB redirection will add in a lot of bandwidth potentially. Multimedia obviously is going to add some bandwidth. So it's just, you kind of have to look at what's going on. But one thing to keep in mind is one thing that PC over IP will do is when it's in a constrained environment, it'll start to bring down its bandwidth utilization. If it's got a lot of pipe, it'll use it. We'll grab it. But when we're in a situation where we're constrained, it'll actually go out and try to, bring down. It'll deliver lossy pictures and true them up. It'll start going down to 25 frames per second instead of 30 frames per second. Things like that. It does do adaptive bandwidth management. As we talked about, it's available with all the thin client types except for WTOS right now. I'm going to talk later about hardware-to-hardware implementation and also about hardware-to-software not working without ESX in the picture. And really, I mean ESXi because this is our last release of ESX, if you haven't seen that messaging. And then just current limitations, as I mentioned, no security server support. Right now, no isochronous USB, but isochronous USB devices like webcams, like PDAs, those kinds of things, don't really work that well in a View desktop to begin with. But it's coming. Again, some things are happening to help with that. And a question?
Does it mean that if you have created a PC over IP only pool, you cannot connect with the security server?
If you've created a PC over IP only pool, can you not connect with a security server?
That's true.
Yeah. That is true. So you need RDP to connect with a security server.
Today.
Right. And there are things happening to fix it. We know it's an issue, and we're working hard to fix it.
Anybody from Teradici in the room, just out of curiosity? Do you want to comment?
Well, if you go down into the lab right now,
Thank you.
they're actually operating with a data of security gateway.
Yep.
As a proxy, that proxy PCI protocol, which is already encrypted into
Into the data center.
So
We debated whether or not we could say anything about that.
we weren't going to, we're both working in the lab, so first things first, a shameless plug for the ThinApp lab. That's my lab. Everyone go downstairs and take the ThinApp lab.
And I've got the Cap IQ lab, so please go take that one.
Okay. So that being said, we knew that this PC over IP through the Teradici security servers, I don't know if
Security gateway.
I hate to screw up the marketing term, right? Because God knows marketing people. But it's actually functional today, right? I mean, we're using it heavily downstairs in the lab. So I'm glad you're in the room because we didn't want to say anything. So thank you. Did they?
Oh, they did. Okay, so that's good. That's good to know. Thanks. We're never sure what we can say or not say. Over the weekend when they got that going, they were like, "Well, this is a secret." So
how soon is that going to be released? Just for my knowledge.
Okay.
Time frame
Fair.
guess?
So
What's that? Within a quarter. All the bloggers in the audience push that out. And what's your name, just so they'll know who to blame? Okay.
an unidentified source from Teradici said. Okay. So any other questions? Oh.
one other comment about the MMR. I suggest you also see whether or not you actually require it. Because the transporting of PCIe takes care of all codecs right now, as well as all future codecs, and it might meet your needs. You don't necessarily need MMR.
Right.
That's a very good point. I guess we should probably stress that a little more. Like Jim mentioned, like regarding Flash, people think, well, you can't do redirection with Flash. I can tell you that from my home connection, I connect to a View desktop with PC over IP. I'm in Minneapolis. My desktop's in California, and I play video content that looks absolutely fantastic over PC over IP, and it's Flash based, right? So just because we aren't doing multimedia redirection doesn't mean the quality isn't great. Is that fair? Okay, that's good.
Any other questions?
Is there a difference between the performance of software PCIe versus hardware PCIe?
What I'd say, and Jim covers this in a slide, but if you're doing hardware to software, meaning if you're connecting from one of the Zero clients with the Teradici chip in it to a virtual desktop, I haven't been able to detect a real big performance difference in that implementation. But if you're doing hardware to hardware, which Jim is going to cover, meaning if I'm connecting to a physical box that has a Teradici chip in it, then that performance is greatly improved over the software solution. Is that fair? Okay. I'm glad we have you in the room.
Yeah, thanks.
You want to come up on stage? We got plenty of room. We could get a few more people up here yet.
So repurposed PCs is a thin client. That's me. So a couple of things. Having two people present, we're keeping track of who's doing what here. So basically, we're taking a PC, we're installing a Linux OS or software-based Windows lockdown mechanism to basically streamline the OS from a full Windows install and allow access to the virtual desktop. So we're taking it and turning it into a thin client. I have some really high-end animation that I did to show that. You can also use it to lock down an XPE or Weston client to obscure the underlying operating system. So some of the benefits here, allow you to move to a virtual desktop without, incurring the cost of actually buying a hardware thin client initially to keep the CapEx down. Allow you to, extend the life of those PCs. You basically turn them into a BIC lighter. When it stops working, you can get rid of it, right? And you can move in a thin client at that point. Also lets you migrate to Windows 7 with View without having to upgrade the desktop hardware necessarily. There's a few, on the Linux side, there's a number of them out there. These are probably the most common implementation is on Linux. We only know of one on Windows, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. But basically using an OEM, view client license, so you're getting all those OEM features we talked about, PC over IP and USB redirection and all that. Most of the solutions are in this category. And, updates are, through their management utilities. Some Linux admin knowledge is obviously helpful, and you're going to still pay for VDA if you go with this, because even though you may still have Microsoft bits on there, you're accessing from a Linux-based OS at this point.
So now to your question again, now you've actually paid for a full Microsoft license on that PC, and it resides there, but they're still going to hit you for that $100.
Because they're nice people.
That's nice. Yeah. Even if you have SA on it.
Because technically...
Because you're not connecting from Windows. You're connecting from Linux. And is there anybody in the room from any of those three vendors, iGel, Wyse, Dev, and IT? Anybody from those thin client vendors in the room? No. When I talk to those guys, they say, well, that's a pretty gray area, but I haven't heard anybody from Microsoft say that you can do that. So I think that that's a pretty hard requirement.
And if you're doing it, you didn't hear from us.
Oh.
If you pay SA on that device,
It,
we asked him about that.
who told you that? The Microsoft sales rep?
Yeah, it's all about it.
Okay, so this is good. This is good information, right? Because these guys are saying specifically that Microsoft will allow you to connect from if you have SA on that
As long as
PC.
you're paying SA.
And we've heard
The OS license, so it's kind of irrelevant.
Right.
It's cheaper to use VECD if you can. Use OEM box to pay for VECD.
Well, VECD's gone. There's no more VECD.
Well, whatever.
They ended at
VDA,
VDA,
yeah.
yeah.
So that's interesting because we have not been told that. We've been told exactly the opposite. But again, I don't
good
know if
information.
anybody in the audience ever had a Microsoft guy tell them something about licensing that a different Microsoft guy said exactly the opposite. I don't think there's two people in the whole company that would ever give you the same answer about licensing.
Yeah.
$100, I don't think it's per year. They break it up depending how long your value agreement, whatever your contract agreement is. They'll break that up by 20 years.
I think, rather than go down the rat hole in the Microsoft licensing thing, I appreciate the comments. I really do, guys. I think the lesson here is talk to your Microsoft rep and negotiate the best deal you can. And if they'll let whatever they'll allow you to do. We can't really comment.
And just put it all in writing. All right, so another option here is to do a GPO lockdown, use group policy to lock down the machine. A lot of administration, a lot of tweaking around to get that to do. I've got customers who've done it. They spent quite a bit of time with it. You can use the View client as the Windows shell. We've actually got a link about how to set that up at the end of the presentation. You still got to license the underlying OS, but you don't need VDA. You just need SA. But that's the way you can license this machine. The other solution here, there's actually a commercial solution called Thin Desktop from a company called Thin Launch. Again, allowing you to repurpose the machine as a lockdown device. Not making any changes. We're not doing an OS change. We're still using Windows, so you're still using the same tools to deploy and manage that you'd use for Windows. Full capability of this 32 or the forthcoming 64-bit client that we'll have with 4.5. Basically, they log in. The only application they see is the View login screen. They log into the machine. They really can't. It basically totally obscures the underlying OS. And again, SA only. We don't need VDA in this situation. So if you're already paying SA, you could use this tool without incurring an additional charge. But it sounds like that would be the case on the Linux side as well.
Nope. Okay. Okay, just a few things on management when you're thinking about these thin client devices. How do you deploy the devices? Let's say that you buy 500 of these devices and you get them in. How do you actually deploy them? That's a big consideration. Once you have deployed them, how do you patch and update them? How do you manage the images going forward? And again, this is where we really start to talk about operational costs. A lot of the stuff that we talk about with View is how much money you can save on OpEx cost. That's why thin clients make so much sense in a View environment, is because if I can have a lot less management of that endpoint, of that desktop environment, it's obviously a lot better for me, and I really save money on the back end, right? So this is the main takeaway point here. There's going to be trade-offs between the amount of management required on a device and the feature set that's available, right? So me personally, and I think I talk about this on the next slide, but personally, I would suggest that you start out at the lowest, with the lowest common denominator, generally speaking, and if that meets all of your needs and it does everything you need to do, it's going to be easier to manage. Let's go with that device, right? And then as you need features, if the lowest common denominator, if the zero client or Wyse Thin OS doesn't do what you need it to do, you need more functionality, by all means, you're going to have to go up the stack and go to Linux or Windows Embedded, right? And you're going to have more management with those types of devices, but you get more functionality. There's a trade-off there, right? And generally, there's more cost for those devices because those operating systems are bigger. So generally speaking, they need more resources, more CPU, and more memory to power that bigger operating system, right? So the hardware is more expensive when you get up to those other operating systems. Understand how every one of these solutions is managed. Management implications moving forward should be a big part of your consideration when you're choosing a thin client platform. As an example, the Teradici solution, that initial deployment is generally just to push a firmware update, and again, that's not always even required, but I know we did this in the lab, when we were configuring the labs over the weekend. We had to update all of the devices, and they did it all centrally. It was very seamless. Do you have any comments here? Okay. In general, what we'd say is this device should be very easy to manage going forward, right? There's not much there to manage, which is our goal, right? Very, very secure, as far as the attack footprint here, right? There's no local information. It's a pretty easy to manage device that's very low touch. Managing Wyse Thin operating system in the Wyse version of Linux is also pretty straightforward and pretty easy. The way most people manage this type of device is they would put a configuration file on an HTTP server or a file share so that when you powered on the device the first time, it would do a DHCP request. You'd have a DHCP tag that would point it at the location of the configuration file, and then the device would self-configure. So basically, these two operating systems should be take it out of the box, plug it in, turn it on, and it completely configures itself. That's a great question. The question is, what's the size of the firmware that you're sending out to each of the zero client devices? Yeah, 3.5 megs? No. Under 3 meg. We're going to do a repeat of this session later on in the day, and it's a requirement that you attend. Okay, thanks. But in any case, these devices, the Thin OS, very, very easy to manage, very, very small operating system. Linux from Wyse, they manage it in the same way as Thin OS, but obviously the OS, the image itself is much bigger because it's a Linux distribution, so a little bit different, right? And then when we get up to the standard Linux devices from the other vendors, most of them have a management tool, right? HP, I believe, uses Altiris. Is that right, Joe?
I think they still do.
Is that right, everybody? HP uses Altiris. All of the different thin client vendors will have a management tool with different levels of capabilities and functionality. We really need you to talk to them. But generally, managing Linux is more work than managing a zero client, but less work than managing a Windows embedded system. I think that's just a general rule of thumb. Smaller attack footprint here because it's you're going to have basically the same vulnerabilities that you would have with any type of Linux distribution. Moving up to Windows embedded. I think you were going to talk about Windows.
Yeah, sure.
Again. Is that right?
Yeah. So this is kind of the top of the stack again. So again, typical deployment. You're using an Altiris type of solution. Again, I mentioned they work for Altiris, so I call them out as an example because we did a lot of this type of management when I was there. Patches, updates, OS management, pretty much same kind of deal with the utility. You're gonna be patching them more frequently because you really should be keeping up with Microsoft patches on that OS. And the security and attack surface are going to be similar to Windows, a little less because of the write filter. The write filter is not a complete protection, though. It's going to block out a bunch of stuff, but not necessarily everything. So we kind of talked about this a little earlier in the presentation, hardware to hardware solutions. Why would I use this? Another use case that isn't a real great use case for you right now is 3D graphics. We can't virtualize a GPU yet, but there are some things coming to kind of help with that. So potential for this would be hardware to hardware solutions. So as we mentioned before, performance is better if I do hardware to hardware. So the way this would go about is you'd have a rack PC, a blade PC, or something with a Teradici chipset already baked onto it, or you'd install a Tera card in there. Again, my great animation skills at work there. Use a PC over IP enabled thin client. We can broker the connection back to that back room, and then you've got a PC over IP connection with full hardware support, really nice 3D rendering. So, just the same as being there. I actually do this at home. I've got a really small office. It gets really hot during the summer, so I've got a machine in the basement that pumps out a ton of heat, and I've got a thin client on my desk and a Tera card in the remote client. Works great. And I do a lot of video and photographic editing, and it's works really well. So I get asked this a lot. What about hardware to software? So I want to use my Wyse client, and I want to broker back to a view manager. Obviously, it's the thing we've been talking about. This is what we're doing downstairs in the lab. Everything is PC over IP thin clients, and we're brokering back to view desktops. Now, the reason I have this sort of little redundant introductory slide is because of this question. I want to take a PC, and I want to install a view agent on it. I want to broker the connection, and I want to use a PC over IP thin client or PC over IP or just a R client on the front end and broker back and get PC over IP. Can't do it. You have to have ESX or ESXi on the back end because we've actually got a component in there that works with the view agent in order to make PC over IP work. So I can't just take a generic piece of hardware, stick a view agent on it, and broker PC over IP connection back. So although we can broker connections to somebody's desktop, it's going to be an RDP connection.
Question.
On the hardware side, can I put an add-on card in a server and on ESX?
So the question is, can you take that Teradici card, put it in an ESX host, and do hardware to hardware solution? And the answer is today, no, you can't. This is another one of these legal things that I don't know how much I can say about this. Do you want to comment on the secret room? The fact that they call it the secret room, I think, is hilarious.
We've announced that we're supporting a server card that will allow us to put more users on a particular host and then run the PCY protocol through that offload card and then run it back.
So this is a very exciting announcement. If you didn't hear it, so anybody here hear about Microsoft with their Remote FX piece? Anybody familiar? Where you basically put a video card in a box, and then you connect to that box, and you can run how many users can I run with Remote FX on a card? Some small number of users. It doesn't scale very well. It hasn't been very widely adopted because of scalability issues. I understand that our friends at Teradici are actually demonstrating this technology in some secret room somewhere on premise that you need some special password to get into. I don't know the details, but in any case, this is a real solution that will be delivered where you can put this next generation Teradici card in your ESX host, and it's going to scale very well, and you'll be able to get very good. You'll be able to get fantastic video performance out of virtual desktops. So that's coming. It just isn't here today.
Is there blade servers that got this pretty cheap?
Yes.
There are Blade PCs that do, for sure. I don't know about servers yet.
Yeah, I should say Blade PCs.
Yeah.
They're Blade-based solutions with Teradici hardware to hardware solutions.
Okay, I'm gonna bring us home here with the last couple of slides. We got about 10 minutes left, and they will kick us out on time. But we will, we'll take again. We'll hang out and take as many questions as you want. So just looking at understanding your requirements, as you're trying to decide what am I going to buy, start with your least common denominator, work your way up. So try to start at that zero client and work your way up, because again, you're going to get more management and OpEx goodness at the zero client level than you are at the XPE level. But you may need all the features at the the Windows embedded kind of level. I put this on here. We put this on here about development lag time. Typically, our features go into the Windows client first, and then the Linux client, and then so it sort of trickles down. That's changing a bit, so this may not be as valid a point today.
But one thing I will say, I talked about how much I really like the Wyse ThinOS piece. One consideration is once we come up with new functionality, there generally will be lag time, because we are not developing a View client for ThinOS. Wyse does all the development work there. There will be some type of lag time before Wyse will have all of the functionality, because they have to implement it themselves, right?
Just fully identify and discuss all your needs with your end users, and make sure you've got a good punch list of everything you're going to have to do and support, your general hardware requirements, feature requirements. What protocol do I want to use? Do I need USB redirection? Is ThinPrint something I really need to use? And then again, as we've talked about, there are sometimes trade-offs. I need all these features, so I have to have a Windows-based thin client, but I realize that I'm going to have a little more management overhead with that kind of an environment. And then, use case driven. One size doesn't fit all. And just a few more things on strategy. Look at what's out there. Review features on an ongoing basis, because things do change. Look at the PC repurposing solutions to extend the life of your PCs. As I said, it can bring down your initial CapEx. Keep in mind it's a moving target. That compatibility guide is going to change, so always try to buy off that compatibility guide. Always look at what's going on. There'll probably be a flurry of new devices on the compatibility guide, or at least update for View 4.5 once we ship. Make sure you're, again, using the compatibility guide to double check. Don't assume anything. Make sure you're getting evaluations. Test the heck out of things. Make sure everything's going to work the way you want it to work. And obviously, why we're talking about this is this can really dramatically help to lower that TCO. Make sure you're gathering all your complete data on your user needs. Choose based on features, research and test, and use the compatibility guide.
Any other questions on any of this stuff, guys? Okay. Do any of the clients support offline mode? That's a great question. As far as I know, there aren't any thin clients that support what we're now calling local mode with View 4.5. So I don't know if that'll change, but there's obviously significant storage requirements for offline mode or for local mode, because I have to store the entire virtual desktop locally. For everybody that's leaving, do the survey online, please. They want us to remind everybody, so hopefully you enjoyed it. And we'll stick around for questions, though. Are we done?
Yep. Thanks for coming. Appreciate it.
Thanks.